Rides and Walks, Arrowsmith and Express and Star may well ring a bell to those in Wolverhampton who read the Saturday edition of the paper in the 60s and 70s. Arthur Arrowsmith was the paper's artist, and at weekends there would be one of his line drawings, together with a ride and often a walk. Selections were published by the Express and Star on cards in wallets. Some of the rides went as far as Windsor, Chatsworth and Jodrell Bank. I've revisited some of the more local sites to see how the view has changed and tried to give a taste of that particular ride and walk. Hewley in Shropshire is selected as the drawing for this ride and walk. This ride takes us from Wolverhampton to Much Wenlock via Bridge North and Moreville. You approach Hewley by turning off the B4371, a road that runs from Much Wenlock to Church Stretton. After turning off, you find yourself descending the side of the Wenlock Edge escarpment. Eventually it levels out, and after a few twists and turns you enter the village, and that's where I pulled in. The drawing shows a black and white timbered house and a farm building. The view has changed little over the years, but the farm building now has solar panels. A new mast has appeared, but an earlier one is still in situ. The village dates back to medieval times and was known as Lee, with the lords of the manor taking its name. Hewley is thought to originate from Hugh of Lee, a lord of the manor who died between 1271 and 1283. The church of St John the Baptist was originally a chapel in the parish of Holy Trinity, Much Wenlock. The late 16th century saw it become a parish church in its own right. In A Shropshire Lad, A. Houseman wrote, "The vane on Hewley steeple veers bright." We must allow some poetic licence, since there is no steeple or weather vane, but it is clear he had some affection for the place. Until the late 18th century, the village buildings were timber framed, and it is thought never to have had a public house. There follows a 2-mile circular walk, or in my case, a drive. Arrowsmith has singled out a school building at the crossroads, so I pulled in to see if it was still there. Well, there it is, on the corner, just as the map said it would be. It is Grade 2 listed and dates from 1872. It was built at the expense of local landowner Arthur Sparrow. Now a private residence, it is called the Old School. As you can see, there is a prominent red brick chimney stack. Continuing the drive, turn right at the crossroads. Half a mile further on, turn right again. The circular drive brings you back to Hewley via an area which is called Kenley Common. Returning through the village, Wenlock Edge comes into view. It's the same road back up the side of Wenlock Edge to rejoin the B4371 to Much Wenlock. Rushbury and Cardington are selected for drawings on separate but similar drives using Corvedale and Wenlock Edge. From Moreville, take the B4368 to Ludlow, and 2 miles past Shipton, turn right to Rushbury. The road that you turn onto takes you over the southwest end of Wenlock Edge. The descent on the other side is down what on the OS map is called Roman Bank. Eventually, this takes you into Apedale. Entering the small village, its 2 main buildings, the primary school and the church, are on the right. Arrowsmith's drawing of Rushbury shows a black and white timbered house with a building in front of it, the church and another building on the left. Nowadays, both of the buildings on the right are still there. The building on the left can be seen, but only the church tower is visible. The church originates from Saxon times and was known as St. Peter's at around 1740. The clock on the west side was dedicated in 1921 to those in the village who died in World War I. The school was built in 1821 and was extended in 1873. An inscribed tablet shows it was endowed by Benjamin Wainwright. This Grade II listed building is 17th century and was once a farmhouse. The building featured in the drawing is also Grade II listed, but is older, dating from the 1600s. We'll now leave Rushbury and make our way to Cardington. Approaching Cardington, you can see Hope Bowdler on the left and Carraddock Hills in front of you. It's a slight rise into the village. There's a very handy parking place next to the village hall and opposite the church. Arrowsmith's drawing shows the view of Hope Bowdler and Carraddock, with the church in the centre. This still, taken when the leaves had fallen, shows Hope Bowdler, Carraddock, and in the middle the church tower. In the summer, the 2 hills are there, but only the corner of the church tower can be seen, peeping out from behind the trees next to the electricity pole. The village is mentioned in the Domesday Book. It was well established in the 14th century, and today remains largely unchanged. The Church of St. James, whose nave dates from Norman times. The top belfry stage of the tower was added in the 14th century. The timber porch was installed in 1639. There are a number of listed buildings in the village. The barracks is 14th century. It's Grade II listed, with the earliest part being timber framed. Opposite the church is the Maltster's Tap. Built around 1600, it was once a farmhouse and is now a private residence. The Royal Oak Public House is Grade II listed and is thought to be the oldest continuously licensed hostelry in Shropshire. Leaving Cardington, we'll have a look at Acton Burnell, which is also on the route of this drive. The name Acton Burnell is Old English, ac for oak and tun for farm or estate, joined with the family name Burnell. An early meeting of Parliament took place in Acton Burnell, where the Statute of Merchant was passed in 1283. It was the birthplace of Robert Burnell, a 13th century archbishop, politician and Lord Chancellor under Edward I. St Mary's Church was built by Robert Burnell and dates from 1260. It is a Grade I listed building, built of sandstone, with a ring of 4 bells, the oldest being dated 1650. Just beyond the church you can see Acton Burnell Castle. Arrowsmith has made a drawing of Acton Burnell Castle, and as you would expect, today the view is unchanged. Now looked after by English Heritage, it is one of the earliest English medieval fortified mansions. It was, however, built more for show than defence. Acton Burnell Hall was constructed as a private residence in 1814 by the Smythe family. It is now the home to Concord College, a private international educational institution. A co-educational establishment, its students are aged between 12 and 19 and the majority are from overseas. On the left of the hall is the remains of the gable end of the great barn where the Parliament sat. The journey back to Wolverhampton is via Cressidge, Much Wenlock and Bridge North. This is a drive along the lanes between Wolverhampton and Bridge North and includes a detour to Ludstone Hall. First, a stop in Claverley, where Church Street leads you to the centre of the village. Behind the churchyard cross stands the 15th century vicarage. It's Grade II listed and is of more than special interest. Next door is the Church of England School. It's 18th century and some Gothic features were added in 1860. Ludstone Hall is a short distance from Claverley and Arrowsmith uses it as a walk. If you're in the car, there is room to park outside. Arrowsmith's drawing was made from inside the grounds, showing the front and side of the hall. Today's picture shows that the front of the hall is unchanged. There is a Jacobean-style lodge and a long drive leads up to the hall. It's an especially good example of a Jacobean mansion. The current house was built in 1607 by John Whitmore, and it remained in that family for over 250 years. The pool opposite is obviously home to a flock of mallards. They decided to cross the road, but took exception to my presence and waddled back under the gate. Leaving the hall, Arrowsmith's walk completes a circular route back to Church Street, Claverley. We'll now follow the route to the site of the next drawing at Allscott. It takes us past the entrance to the Davenport Estates on the left and Worfield Village on the right. Left at the next crossroads, and this road leads to Allscott. Poole Cottage is to be found along here. It's 18th century, Grade II listed, and the mere is man-made. Prone to dry out, an entry in the Parish Magazine of 1935 reads, "It is sad to see the mere so dry, and hundreds of eel lying dead, some as thick as a man's wrist." Allscott itself is just farm buildings and a few cottages. The drawing shows the farmhouse and some barns on the other side of the road. Today the view is much the same, although a grain silo can now be glimpsed in the middle distance. The gable end of the farmhouse has been rebuilt and is in keeping with the original structure. The barns have been converted and are now private residences. Leaving Allscott, we meet the Telford to Bridge North Road, and the ride turns right towards Telford. The journey finishes via Sutton Maddock, Shifnal and Beckbury. The subject this time is Broncroft Castle in Shropshire. It's Wolverhampton to Bridgnorth, on to Moreville, and take the B4368 towards Craven Arms, and turn left 3 miles past Shipton. It's signposted Tugford. At the next T-junction, signposted Broncroft and Tugford, turn right. Follow this road for a couple of miles, and then there's room to pull up on the verge just past the entrance to Broncroft Castle. Arrowsmith's drawing shows the manor house, the gable end of an outhouse, and a large tree. A still taken today in the autumn is an unchanged scene, but earlier in the year a tree in full leaf blocked the view. The castle is a fortified manor house founded by Sir Roger Burleigh in the 14th century. In the Civil War it was garrisoned by Royalists until 1645, and then suffered considerable damage in 1648. The Lutley family made repairs in the 17th century, and James Whittaker extensively rebuilt Broncroft after he bought it in 1889. If you're keen, then there is now an almost 4-mile circular walk. Tugford is just a small hamlet. In 1861 the population was 165, but by 1961 it had halved to 86. I didn't bother with the walk and returned the way I'd come, to the B4368, and turned right towards Moreville and Bridgnorth. This is a drive through the lanes of South Staffordshire, with the village of Braidley being the subject of the drawing. The journey is Penkridge back to Penkridge. On the way to Braidley there's a left turn by some attractive cottages on the edge of the village of Leavedale, and a view over to Pye Green on Cannock Chase. The drive into Braidley takes you past the Red Lion and the church on the right, and just past the church there is room to park by the village hall. Arrowsmith's drawing is a scene from the road we have just driven up, showing a timber-framed cottage, the church tower, and the Red Lion pub. Today the church and the Red Lion are the same, but the thatched cottage now has a brick frontage. Braidley is a small village, and in the 2011 census had a population of 513. It has the Red Lion pub and the 13th century church of St Mary's. A Grade 1 listed building, it has a Norman font. From Braidley it's only a few miles to Church Eaton. The landmark Village Institute is built in the Gothic Revival style. The parish church, dedicated to St Editha, is dated from the 12th century. According to Nicholas Pevsner, the architectural historian, the repaired Norman font and that at Braidley were made at Nosal. The buildings of Church Eaton range from the 15th century to modern council housing. Leaving Church Eaton, Arrowsmith's Drive completes the circular route by criss-crossing the A5 back to Penkridge. Tiverton and Broadway are 2 trips that take us a little farther afield into Worcestershire. Arrowsmith uses the M5, but today it's just as easy to approach Tiverton by the A449, over the M5 at Junction 6 and onto the Evesham Road, then left at the second island to Crowell. After the Tiverton sign, turn left into the village. The drawing was made from this road. There are buildings on the left, with the church in the centre background. The view hasn't changed. The buildings on the left are exactly as they were. In past times, it belonged to the Bishop of Worcester's Manor of Northwick. Later on, ownership passed to the Priory of Worcester. Unusually, the church is dedicated to St Peter ad Vincula, that is, Peter in chains. There is a poem associated with the church: a stone church, a wooden steeple, a drunken parson, a wicked people. If you follow Arrowsmith's circular route, then just to the north of the village is the Worcester and Birmingham Canal, with close by the Bridge Inn. 20 miles further down the A44, and signposted off the Evesham bypass, is Broadway. Arrowsmith chose not to use the famous Lincoln Arms, but instead pictured a scene further up the High Street. The view, of course, is unchanged. We are in the Cotswolds, and alterations would be unthinkable in an area of outstanding natural beauty. Broadway is a popular base to explore the Cotswolds. The Lincoln Arms was originally a 16th century coaching inn. Broadway is situated at the bottom of Fish Hill on the western Cotswold escarpment. The drive then continues up Snow's Hill, past the entrance to the manor, well worth a visit, into the hamlet of Snow's Hill. Snow's Hill itself is a small, unspoiled hamlet typical of the Cotswolds. It's a place to wander around for a short while, away from the touristy bustle of nearby Broadway. The ride is then completed by a circular route through the lanes back to Evesham. This drive sees us venture just over the border into Herefordshire, and Lentwardine is the subject for the illustration. The route is through Corvedale, over Ludlow Racecourse, right onto the A49 and left towards Lentwardine. It's a large village, and I turned left just before the bridge, and after a quick 3-point turn found room to park. The illustration shows the Lion pub and the bridge over the River Teme. Things are much the same, but I don't think it's the same cars in front of the pub. The bridge over the River Teme is 18th and 19th century and is just below the confluence of the rivers Teme and Clun. The riverbanks, both upstream and downstream, are readily accessible and look to be very popular. Arrowsmith describes Lentwardine as a centre for anglers. Further on over the bridge, out of the village, there are pleasant views over the Herefordshire countryside. The return journey can be made via Ludlow and Cleobury North to Bridgnorth. Cleobury Mortimer is chosen as the illustration for this ride. The route takes us from Bridgnorth along the B4363 to Cleobury Mortimer. As you drop down into Cleobury, the houses come into view with Titterstone Clee in the background. I pulled in just short of the main street of this small market town. Arrowsmith may have exaggerated the twist in the church spire. Perhaps he was influenced by the one in Chesterfield. Today that exact view would have the church obscured by a large tree, as is the Saxon cross. But the buildings on the left, though, are still the same. Cleobury Mortimer is a small market town, one of the smallest towns in Shropshire. The main street is lined with shops, and I was expecting Granville and Arkwright to be standing outside this one. The market charter was granted to Hugh de Mortimer by Henry III in 1226, and in perpetuity in 1227. The town was served by 2 railways. Today, the nearest one is on the Severn Valley Line. One side of the street is tree-lined and has some attractive black and white timbered buildings. The 12th century church of St Mary is well known for its crooked spire, the result of warping of the oak timbers, and rot caused by damp where the spire sits on the masonry. Leaving Cleobury along the main street, the route takes you over the clear hills with some fine views of the Black Mountains on a clear day. The remainder of the journey returns via Ludlow, over the racecourse, along Corvedale and back to Bridgnorth. This is a ride to Holt Fleet in Worcestershire. The route takes you along the A449, past Kidderminster, then turning off at Ombersley and crossing the River Severn at Holt Fleet. Arrowsmith suggests parking at the inn and walking along the bridle path, but stopping there is now for customers only. To get there by car, carry on up the hill. The bridge over the River Severn was designed by Thomas Telford and opened in 1830. Turn left at the next junction and head towards Worcester. About a mile further on, it's another left turn off the main road. Follow this lane and there's room to park on the verge outside the church. To obtain this view, Arrowsmith must have positioned himself in a field that I was unable to access. It's a similar scene from over the hedge, but the trees now obscure the nave of the church. The two main buildings are St Martin's Church and the Manor House. The hamlet, known as Holt, comprises a few barn conversions and some modern housing. The nave of the church was constructed around 1110, and the rest of the building dates from the 14th and 15th centuries. The Manor House is a block of buildings partly from the 15th and partly from the 18th centuries. The large 14th century tower is probably a survivor from an earlier fortified building. It's a pleasant ride to return to Wolverhampton via Harlow and Worcester. This is a ride to Hopsay in Shropshire, with a circular walk from the village. The route is via Bridgnorth, Moreville, Craven Arms and Aston-on-Clun. Arrowsmith suggests using the road if the walk via the dashed line is muddy. The approach to Hopsay is through the village of Aston-on-Clun. After a right turn over the bridge in Aston-on-Clun, the lane leads you to the small village of Hopsay. There's plenty of room to leave the car, and I use the verge at the start of the walk. The drawing shows a building on the right, Hopsay Hill behind it, and Wart Hill on the left. A still taken during the winter shows a similar vista, with the farmhouse looking relatively unchanged. This is what it looks like in late summer, when the hedges have grown and obscured the view. Hopsay is a small village, with both the shop and the school now closed. St Mary's Church was built around 1200. It has an unusual tower of a double pyramid, the lower one's truncated with a smaller one on top. There is a large lich gate, which according to the inscription dates from 1892. The old rectory still stands on the corner of the lane leading up to the church and is now a private residence. The return is back over the bridge in Aston-on-Clun. An illustration by Arrowsmith of the area by the bridge shows the decorated arbor tree. As you can see, the tradition still continues. The tree dressing ceremony takes place on the last Sunday in May, and even at the end of winter the flags are still flying. The village actually lies near to the River Clun, with the brook from Hopsay flowing through the village itself. The journey back is the reverse route, via Craven Arms and Bridge North.